Okay, as I mentioned today, I'm going to have a very short statement about a saint, and then I'm going to give an example of a Mount Angel monk. So I have 9 different Mount Angel monks I'm going to be looking at. And part of the reason I'm doing that is because you're either are or are becoming oblates of Mount Angel Abbey. Okay, so it would seem to benefit you to have some more and more examples of actual living experience here. One day we might be writing about you. So, starting at the top, love. I chose Saint Therese of Lisieux, the little flower, who said, "My vocation is love." There's been a lot of ink spilled about the life of Saint Therese of Lisieux. And, she only lived into her middle 20s in her vocation and considered by 2 popes to be the greatest saint of modern times. Okay, so this is the only one I'm looking at 2 monks. So Father Jerome Vespi and Brother Fidelis Schonenberger. What I'm going to do is we have something in the main hall of the monastery called the necrology. Necros means death, died, and ology, study of, or writing about. And so we have 180 monks who have died. And so I've chosen from their necrology articles sections of them. Some of them are fairly long and not so long, but none of them are more than a couple minutes. Father Jerome is considered to be one of the holiest monks who lived at Mount Angel Abbey. His holiness and well-grounded monastic discipline guided many people during his lifetime. He was born in Schmerikon, Canton St. Gall, in Switzerland. He was only a year old when his father died and 6 years old when his mother died. That's often a case for people to start to shut down. He clearly did not. 14 years old, another monk of Mount Angel Abbey, Father Leo Benedict Buchholzer, brought him to America. Then he made his monastic profession in 1894, and with his future classmate, Father Abbot Bernard Murphy, whom we will also hear about, he went to the International Benedictine College in San Anselmo in Rome. The reason they went is we had burned out of the monastery, and we were burned out for 11 years. So we needed to send monks off to study. He was ordained at the Benedictine Basilica of St. Paul's outside the walls, June 9th, 1900. He held the responsible post of prior for 23 years, the second longest prior in Abbey history. And after the fire of 1926, he really, and Abbot Bernard's increasing blindness, he basically became the decision maker. He became the abbot without the title. He was never the abbot, and he didn't want to be the abbot, but he continued to lead the community in that way. He was known for Chapter of Faults conferences. He was known for being the confessor of many people. And once he stepped down as prior, then he became the confessor for a lot of monks. There used to be lines of confessees outside his door. His lifetime habit of cheerful availability, his readiness to lay aside what he was doing at the moment in order to accommodate another, were eloquent proof of the self-effacing charity he had attained. A man of great love. Brother Fidelis Schonenberger. Okay, so Father Jerome lived 1875-1954, Brother Fidelis, 1870 to 1958. So the service to the Abbey of Brother Fidelis Schonenberger and his example to the other members of the monastic community were worthy of note. Brother was small of stature, but big of soul, and a giant of zeal and action. For many years he had charge of the orchards, the kitchens, and the pigs. He continued in those charges until a few years before his death. Let's see here. Okay, in his latter years, this is so humorous about him. He would take holy water down to the monks in the cemetery and sprinkle their graves. He said, to give them refreshment. And he used recycled holy water that he found in other places. So he was very abstemious. I do that sort of thing myself. It's delightful to read about somebody else who did that. Okay. So, he was especially known for his love for the holy souls in purgatory. Few days went by that he did not visit the cemetery to sprinkle the graves with holy water and to pray for the departed brethren. Okay. Father Thomas Brockhouse. So this one is an example of joy. So Blessed Fortunata Vitae, whom we'll be hearing about more tomorrow, in fact, we'll be hearing about all of these saints tomorrow, she lived a simple and devoted Benedictine life. Her sisters noted her joy. Father Thomas was the vice postulator for her cause when she became, that means that he was the second person in charge, but he did most of the work because the postulator was doing other things. Okay. He was well known in the Pacific Northwest and across the United States as an exceptional canon lawyer. He is remembered for the wisdom and prudence with which he spoke and for his ready laughter and dry wit. He was very, very intellectually capable. So he was born in 1914, first of 8 children, to a German-Austrian ancestry in Humphrey, Nebraska. And he moved out here. He began school in 1926, and 3 days later, the monastery and school burned. Shall we say it was a little delay in his plans. But because he was, that's what had happened. That's one of our two major fires. He'd planned to study in Rome, but because of World War II, that was suspended. So he studied in Catholic University of America instead. He did get back to Rome, however, and this is worth reading directly. Father Thomas most distinguished himself as a canon lawyer by teaching canon law in the seminary from 1945 to 86. And he also taught at the seminary in Seattle for 3 years. He served as the vice postulator for the cause of the Benedictine Blessed Fortunata Vitae, due to his unusual ability with canon law and his monthly editing of the page in the St. Joseph magazine that we published for decades, that promoted her cause. Through this, Father Thomas finally got to work in Rome, where he assisted at her beatification and met the Pope. He was disgruntled. He was my first spiritual director in the monastery, and he was disgruntled that he didn't get to study in Rome. But when he went to Rome, he got in line ahead of bishops because it was important that everything was done according to the schedule to be ready for the beatification. Okay, so I would say the Lord more than made up for the deficit. Okay, he won the distinction of the Rule of Law Award, the highest award given by the Canon Law Society of America. And he received it on the 50th anniversary of that organization, which I considered a double award. He was elected year after year to serve on the Abbot's Council. When no longer able to serve on the council, he signed checks in the business office. Age and infirmity slowed him down physically, yet his mind remained sharp even to his final days. I was there a few days before his death. The advice nurse came in and did long testing of him. And Father, if you've ever seen somebody dying, their breathing goes up and down, and their heartbeat goes up and down, up and down. And the advice nurse said to him, Father Thomas, I think Jesus is calling you to be with him. And his eyes were closed, and he said, I won't keep him waiting. Would that we could say that days before our death. Father Bernard Murphy, 1874-1942, the third abbot of Mount Angel Abbey, the first American-born abbot. He led the community courageously despite the devastating fire of 1926. He had eye problems, which resulted in blindness, and he needed to seek a replacement as abbot. So he was born in Portland, 1874, baptized there. He was from a pioneer Oregon family. His family came out on the Oregon Trail in 1846. Wow. Due to weak eyes, he had suffered for many years. In 1933, he went, after the 1926 fire, he was elected in 1921 as an abbot. So he went to New York to try to get an operation to save him from total blindness, but it wasn't successful. In 1934, Abbot Bernard followed the canon law of the day and asked Rome for a coadjutor abbot, which was granted. Abbot Thomas Meyer, a local man who grew up in Salem, was elected to replace him. Toward the end of his life, Abbot Bernard had been in ill health for several years. Then, in his last days of illness, it became acute and serious. Abbot Bernard died February 18th, 1942, on Ash Wednesday. As a result, he received blessed ashes that day, to which he responded several times, "Yes, and to dust thou shalt return." Death came quickly. Brother Joseph Travis, 1877 to 1959. Brother Joseph Travis came to the Abbey seeking Christ and found Christ in his everyday work here. His seeking Christ through his work did not stop until he died. 1924, he made a retreat to Mount Angel Abbey. He was so attracted by the monastic life that he decided to stay. He entered his novitiate March 20th, 1925, so the day before St. Benedict's feast, and pronounced his temporary vows as a lay brother. 3 years later, he made perpetual vows. During his first years, he worked in the orchard or on the farm under the direction of Brother Fidelis, who we just heard about. Next was the kitchen and the refectory. Shortly before 1934, he was engaged as a postal clerk. Then, with the death of Brother Michael Dunn that year, he became the postmaster. He labored there for 14 years until at the age of 70, he was required to retire. But to him, retirement did not mean to take things easy. He was given charge of the position of sacristan, and in spite of increasing deafness, fulfilled that charge until 1958, the year before he died. So that was an example of patience. Of course, Abbot Bernard Murphy was of peace. Next one. Kindness. So, I realize that I have skipped a couple of things here. Okay, St. Benedict, following the example of Benedict's rule, is the example of peace. Remember, I mentioned to you that peace is the motto of Benedictines. And then St. Maximilian Kolbe, whom I use as the example of patience. Of course, we know that he died in Auschwitz with great patience. The guards did not want to look at him because they knew if he looked at them, they would realize their fault. And he did not blame them. He simply did what he was called to do. So for kindness, I use St. Teresa of Calcutta, a quote from her. "Speak tenderly to them. Let there be kindness in your face, in your eyes, in your smile, in the warmth of your greeting. Always have a cheerful smile. Don't only give your care, but give your heart as well." So the example of kindness that I'm going to present is Father Brendan Shea. He lived 1916 to 1968. Father Brendan Shea was known for his spiritual guidance and courage, through which he was an inspiration to those who came in contact with him. He died relatively young, at only the age of 52, after a protracted illness. 1940s. He was a native of Butte, Montana, graduated from Carroll College in Helena, Montana, 1938, joined the Abbey in 1942, and was ordained 1945 on December 8th. From 1947 to 53, he was a chaplain and science teacher at Mount Angel Prep, which later became John F. Kennedy High School in the city of Mount Angel. 1954 to 64, he was associate pastor at St. Agatha Parish, which is near the Selwood Bridge, a parish that we started, one of two parishes that we started. 1964, ill health caused him to retire from St. Agatha Parish. And after some recuperation, he was assigned as assistant pastor at St. Mary of the Sea in Rockaway on the Oregon coast. So that's the other parish that we founded. However, ill health there caused him to retire from ministry, at which time he returned to the family home in Butte, Montana, under the care of his sister, Mary, Mrs. Guy McDonald. When his health permitted, he offered Mass in the parish church in which he was raised. He died August 24th, Butte, Montana, of a heart attack. And he had 3 living sisters who were able to attend his funeral. So Masses were offered for him in Butte, Montana, and here at the Abbey where he is buried. Moving on to generosity. Example of generosity that I chose was St. Vincent de Paul. Just think of how many St. Vincent de Paul societies and there are certainly in the country and beyond. Okay, so St. Vincent de Paul was certainly a generous giver. Let's spend a little bit more time with this one. This is not taken from the necrology. It's taken from the eulogy that I was asked to write and present. So Brother Mark Parker, who we remembered today at Mass for his first anniversary of his passing, lived 1948 to 2022. Brother Mark Parker was known for his great devotion in his monastic life. As his health slowly deteriorated over several decades, he ultimately preferred to serve our community out of public view, yet he remained effective in his prayer and work. John Parker was born 1948, Fairbanks, Alaska. He had one sister. She's still living. So he attended elementary and junior high schools in 6 cities: Prescott, Arizona, Fairbanks, Alaska, Santa Monica, California, where as a 2nd grader, he was driven to school in a Rolls Royce. Kennewick, Washington, Pasco, Washington, Seattle, Washington. For his secondary education, he attended only Kennewick High School, from which he graduated in 1966. And he attended the University of Washington in 1971. In Kennewick High School, he won 2nd in state in the mile. His transition from being unchurched to becoming Catholic and finally a monk was guided by a number of people whom he dearly loved. Several of these people helped him to overcome a severe, life-threatening spiritual trial, which convinced him that God loved him. I heard the story that he told 30 years apart. It was the same story. I said, I think that one's true. After he had become a Catholic, one day the gospel at Mass spoke about the rich young man. He said to God, "Oh, you mean me?" And he began to explore a religious vocation. Realized that diocesan priesthood was not for him. So he looked into a Franciscan community in Detroit where he visited. He worked for Northwest Airlines, so he was able to fly back there free. He was in the taxi. Shocked at the poverty he saw there, he returned to the airport without even leaving the taxi. He called the Franciscans. He says, "I'm not going to be able to make it." Still, he sensed the vocation, so he told God that he needed a clear statement to confirm this. It came 3 days later, when he and dear friends, a Catholic couple, were distributing communion in a nearby nursing home in Renton, Washington, where he lived. That day changed his life when he met a Benedictine woman who had heard about him, Sister Alice Childs from Queen of Angels Monastery in Mount Angel. She was at the nursing home there, visiting her sister. Upon meeting John, Sister Alice boldly told him, "You belong at Mount Angel." That was the clear statement from God that he had sought. The very next weekend, he went to Mount Angel for the first time. He made profession September 8th, 1987, received the name Mark the Evangelist, which he requested due to his love for Scripture. It was given to him by Abbot Bonaventure Zare, who also loved Scripture and taught and studied it and taught it. He could read like 5 languages, passing back and forth. He was very capable. So Brother Mark memorized the entire gospel according to St. Mark. To say that Brother Mark didn't do things in half measures would be an understatement. As a senior monk, he became well known through several assignments, which he performed with his characteristic devotion, sometimes leading to fiery reactions. He was assistant house guest master, that's in the monastery, for a couple of years, led to lengthy service as the house guest master for 15 years. He served in the monastery. Guests who came to the monastery often commented that he included fresh cut flowers and a number of things to help them feel at home. He worked in the refectory, that's the monastic dining room, in the bookstore, which used to be right upstairs. And he was mentored by Brother Benedict, who had that job from 1966. He'd had it for decades. And so Brother Mark learned how to be bookstore manager from him. And he consistently played Gregorian chant as background music to set a reverent tone in the store. So during his years of service in the public eye, health continued a slow decline. So his work shifted to the monastery, where he was assigned to the Erasmus prayer program. So there he worked in a hidden way from 2006 to 18. With characteristic great devotion, he processed several annual novenas and the thousands of prayer requests received by the Abbey Development Office. That includes individual requests for prayers and for Mass. To help him maintain focus, Brother Mark often worked while listening to classical music played at a noticeable volume, echoing down the usually silent halls of the monastery. In the last decades of his life, Brother Mark's body slowed down very significantly due to several causes, some of which required daily and sometimes strong pain medication. The symptoms included chronic pain in his legs, particularly his feet, which swelled so much that in his final years he found it difficult to wear shoes. His feet looked like they were on fire. They were that red. Brother Mark Parker lived an intense life. He once drove from Fairbanks, Alaska to Seattle, Washington, nonstop. That's about 20 hours. Intensity characterized his monastic prayer and work as well. As an athlete on the University of Washington track team, he ran the mile, as I noted. A 4-minute mile is considered world-class speed. He once ran a 4-minute, 25-second mile. That he discounted the magnitude of that achievement was consistent with the way he lived his Benedictine life, understated and often hidden, but with great devotion. So Brother Mark is an example of generosity. Faithfulness is an example of St. Faustina Kowalska, who said, "Jesus, I trust in you." I take it you're familiar with her story in the Divine Mercy devotion. We'll hear more about her tomorrow. So for faithfulness, I've chosen Brother Martin Myrtle. At only 66 years of age, he became the youngest Golden Jubilarian in Abbey history. You do the math. He made profession. He started in the monastic life at the age of 16. Yeah, rather unusual. He remained proud of his Czech heritage and had a subtle sense of humor that you'll hear about. So he lived 1917 to 1992. 1944, 10 years after he became a monk, Brother Martin told his vocation story, and he wrote it down in a booklet, which was designed to inspire others' vocations. And he put, I was born April 18th, 1917 in Denton, Montana. He had several brothers and two sisters, both of whom became Sisters of St. Mary of Oregon. So they were here in Beaverton. Came from Czech heritage. His mother was in Michigan, was born in Michigan. And the Bohemian language is spoken exclusively in the home. It was the tongue in which we said our family prayers. The rosary, of course, was prayed in common each evening. It says, I always admired the way my father worked and the exact repair and arrangement for everything he did around the home. And so he imitated that when he came to the Abbey. It was on a Sunday afternoon in 1932 that Father Thomas Brockhouse, we heard about, and Abbot Bernard Murphy, that we heard about, and Father Norbert Matucci came to the family home in Scappoose, down the river from Portland. He was out fishing, and he arrived barefoot, and they had a little chuckle about that. But he liked what he heard, and so he joined the monastery at 15. So that's quite remarkable. So he made his perpetual profession at 21. He had to extend his time in the juniorate because you couldn't make perpetual profession until the age of 21. So he took correspondence courses in engineering and night classes in welding and taught himself a wide range of subjects to help keep the physical plant moving smoothly. Remember his interest that he learned from his father. He worked in mechanics, in heating plant, and general repairs in the Abbey, lots of them. He was a great tease. Sometimes he surprised his confreres in the monastery with the great imitation of a cat. Like, who let the cat into the monastery? Well, that was Brother Martin. And his subtle sense of humor. He prayed in Czech. And sometimes he would say, my checkbook is missing. There we go. So he had gone to Westminster Abbey to attend the funeral of Abbot Eugene Medved, another Czech, a man who had lived in the monastery and became the abbot in Westminster, east of Vancouver, BC. And he became quite ill and died at 75 years of age, having reached 58 years of profession. Gentleness. Use St. Francis as an example. He was charismatic but gentle. He did not force himself on other people. That pretty well describes Father Marian Delmonico, who lived 1925 to 2003. Born in Bronx, New York, to Italian parents, his name was actually Americo Armando. The family called him Rick. So he received his primary education in the Bronx, moved out to California, met a street preacher, and the street preacher convinced him and several other men to join Mount Angel Abbey, which he did. So he became a pharmacist, and then he was profession 1960. He was ordained as a priest 1966, and not long thereafter, he was sent to Our Lady of the Angels Monastery, Cuernavaca, Morelos, Mexico, about an hour south of Mexico City. And there he learned Spanish and worked for many years there. And then when he came back home, he worked in the Providence Benedictine Nursing Center in Mount Angel, an assignment for which he was particularly well loved by patients and staff alike. Then he became the Abbey infirmarian to take care of infirmed monks. And late in his life, Father Marian had been in declining health for some years. Nevertheless, he chose to continue working right to the last week of his life. What does that mean? Father Thomas Brockhouse, who we heard about, was quite ill. Father Marion slept on the floor next to him so that he wouldn't die alone. Wow. Self-control. He used the example of St. Thomas Aquinas, I mentioned yesterday, and we'll talk about him tomorrow. And then the monk example of that is Father Bede Rose, lived 1880 to 1949. He was best known as a professor of dogmatic theology at Mount Angel Seminary, as a translator of works from Latin and French, and for almost the last 10 years of his life as the chaplain at Queen of Angels Monastery. He was born in Italy, Italian father, English mother. He studied at Oxford University, where he earned a Bachelor of Arts degree, came to Canada in 1906, and worked in lumbering camps. In 1909, he entered the United States and became a faculty member as a lay professor in our college. And then later on, here's the list of things that he taught: algebra, geometry, rhetoric, literature, ancient history, English, Latin, Christian doctrine, philosophy, and dogmatic theology. One might wonder where he found time to sleep. So he translated the theological works of one of his old Roman professors, the Dominican Father Garrigou Lagrange, 5 large volumes, the 6th of which was 1,000 pages long. Do you see why I call him an example of self-control? You have to be really focused to do that kind of work. Remember, he was doing this with a typewriter. Okay? Father Bede had suffered some heart attacks, but was in good health, and for the last months, his death came unexpectedly. About a year before his death, he retired from the chaplaincy at Queen of Angels Monastery in Mount Angel, but returned there to take up residence and began to work on 2 new volumes of theology he had contracted to translate. So basically, he worked to almost the end of his life. Okay. I hope what I've given you is an example of the range of the monks of Mount Angel Abbey, brothers, priests, abbots. And I hope that one day, if not written in this way, that they will be written in heaven, your story of being an oblate of Mount Angel Abbey. Father and Son and the Holy Spirit, amen.